I'll be hit with characters all at once, and I'll get very emotional. I realize what makes my stories special. A lot of sex, a lot of violence. I damn well better love it.
Hello, friends. The show is called Conversations. My name is Big Ben Hillman. Thank you for tuning in. On today's episode, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk with another good friend of mine, author and podcaster Andy Mascola. Andy has written many books, and his latest book, called Where Are You Now, Randy Dow, is available for sale on Amazon.com. You can also hear Andy on his weekly podcast called The People Are the Enemy, and you can read his music reviews in a publication called Surviving the Golden Age. Now, as a creative person myself, I'm always interested to know what sorts of things inspire and motivate other creative people and what their creative process is. And fortunately for me, my friend Andy was willing to sit down and share some of that with me. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Andy Mascola. Well, first of all, we've known each other for a really long time, right? What's it been, like 30-some years?
Ooh, holy moly, yeah, at least.
I wanted to ask you, though, about what things you derive inspiration from as a creative person in all your creative endeavors.
I'll be hit with characters all at once. I'll get ideas for characters. I'll literally be doing something else. Sometimes I'll be driving. Sometimes I'll be on the treadmill walking, because I do that every single day. And I mean, it's going to sound strange, but I'll see the characters and I'll know those are the characters that I need to work with. And whenever it happens, and it's happened just about every year for the past 7 or 8 years, well, maybe the last 6 years, but I'll be hit with it and I'll see these characters clearly and I'll know who they are, and I'll get very emotional. And I will literally start to emote, just cry. And it's a weird thing.
Wow.
And I can't explain it.
Yeah.
And it happens. And I think I cry more because it just means I feel like somehow something has, even if whether it's generated in my own mind or outside of my own mind, meaning I don't know if I believe in God. I'm pretty much agnostic, I guess. But something has given me a character to write a story about or derive stories from. Paper Bag Revolver. I saw all those characters clearly. I literally saw them while I was on the treadmill in my mind, and I just started emoting, and I was just okay, I know who those guys are, and I have to write a story about them now.
It's almost like the characters are a part of you. They're an extension of who you are. So being able to release that and put it out into the world, it must be very cathartic.
I've heard that there's 2 types of writers. There's magicians, and then there's architects, meaning that the architect basically plans everything out. He knows exactly the structure of his story. He knows, or she knows, who the characters are, their backgrounds, what's going to happen, the pivotal moments, et cetera, et cetera. They've composed all this in advance of sitting down behind the keyboard and actually writing it. And the other type of writer is a magician, who basically might have a bare bones idea and might have an idea of what the characters are or what they'll be doing or something about them, and then basically just tries to make it happen as it goes, meaning from day to day. And that's the way I worked on all my books. Even if it's just the night before, I'll think of the story that I'm working on, and I'll write down exactly where I want the plot to go and some points that I want to hit the next day. And sometimes I hit all of them, and sometimes I hit none of them, and sometimes the plot goes somewhere else entirely. I remember my father-in-law helped me with Wolfish Girl, because I was I don't know how to end it. And he said, why don't you try to bring it around, try to wrap it around to the beginning again somehow, manage to make it come full circle.
And that did it.
And that did it. Yeah, I'd seen Inside Llewyn Davis. I don't know if you know that Coen Brothers movie, but I just watched that movie a couple weeks before, and that's exactly what that movie did. It kind of had that kind of cyclical plot that kind of wrapped around right to the beginning again. And I thought, yeah, man, I could do that. And that's cool. That's a fun way to end it.
Yeah.
Or there's been times when I've just been struck with a way to pull a bunch of pieces together, like with Kissing Oblivion. I was able to kind of take a bunch of different elements that were, subplots, and then just kind of pull them all together at the end to kind of make this real cool plot. And I suppose that's probably the best kind of ending that you can hope for, is that when all these pieces kind of wrap up so neatly. Sometimes it's ambiguous. I like ambiguous endings too. I've got nothing against ambiguous endings,
Mm.
You just feel like it's over when it's supposed to be over.
You've done so much with the podcast. I mean, how long have you been doing that now?
Well, it'll be 3 years on January 1st.
Yeah.
I've done it every week since January 1st, 2018.
You've not taken a break at all during that?
No, I've done at least one show a week. At the beginning, it was just 10-minute episodes, and I had my daughter with me, and it was nice because we were just goofing around basically.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where she said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, well, I'm not going to stop. It's good because I'm promoting the work that I've done as far as the books are concerned from week in and week out. It's like free advertising. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is I like doing it. And it's something that I thought like I could potentially get very good at if I kept practicing it and if I worked at it long enough.
Sure.
So ultimately I went it alone, and then I started making it a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started booking guests. And then initially I think I was kind of, freewheeling it with the guests. And that is obvious when you listen to those early interviews. And what I found, at least for myself, what worked for me was just like scripting everything out. And I thought if I had like a written out monologue at the beginning, and then a written introduction for my guest, and then questions lined up, enough questions to keep a conversation going for 20-25 minutes if the person didn't answer very long, then I could it would be a lot easier for me, and it would make for a more interesting conversation. Like I remember like there was this conversation I had with this guy a couple months back, and I had all these questions laid out for us just to talk about in an open way because we were just discussing one album. And at the very end, he asked me a very specific question, and I sounded like an idiot because like I just wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready for the thing to get turned back on me. And that wasn't good. That wasn't good either on my part. I should have, should have thought to myself, well, this is a conversation,
right? And
you're both discussing the same thing. You should be ready that it could get turned around on you. And as soon as he turned around on me, I was kind of like, I didn't know what to say. Yeah. And I'd say like, that was my fault. I this is all a learning experience. Everything is. I interviewed a fella this past weekend from England, and it was great because he was a lecturer. So I'm like, this will be so easy.
Yeah.
And it was because he was a natural speaker, and he just like I just set him up, and he just went writing questions that are open-ended that people can't get out of with like a yes or no. That's another thing. You know what I mean? It's like you think about like your questions as an interviewer, and if you're letting somebody just walk into a yes or no, they could ice you out by just saying yeah, no. Like if it's not like if they're a considerable person who doesn't have anything to lose or gain from talking to you,
right?
I don't know if you heard the Paul Barman episode, but like, I mean that guy, he was he was a wise ass, and like I wasn't ready for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like I did it the best I could, but I felt like, because Paul Barman doesn't know anybody anything. He's on the phone with me. You know what I mean? It's like he doesn't give a shit. He was out in the street while he was doing it.
Yeah.
And
they say that for one of the first rules of interviewing is you should never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. Do you agree with that or no?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's a great rule. I don't think I've always done that. But I think I've always had like at least an opinion on the question that I'm asking to think like, okay, I know how I feel like this or how it sounded to me. So if they give me a very simple answer, I can say, well, I'll tell you what, the first time I heard that, this is what I thought. Right. Or the first time that I saw that thing that we're both talking about, this is what I thought about it. Howard Stern interviewed like the Beastie Boys like in their first year in like 85 or something like that when they first broke big with License to Ill. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, he never replayed the interview because they walked all over him. And they basically, they were huge wise asses. And he was embarrassed because he's a shock jock who's into like prog rock from, you know what I mean? And he was like 20 years older than them. Like, it was so many, like the cultural differences, like everything. He wasn't into hip hop, like all these things. And when I heard the interview, because I finally tracked it down, it was exactly that. It was like them just kind of like goofing around because, again, like they didn't give a shit.
Speaking about music, I mean, we've been talking a little bit about music, and you have a lot of musicians on your podcast. You also do some album reviews for publication, online publication or print publication?
Nope, it's online. It's survivingthegoldenage.com.
Yeah. For a long time, I knew you, before I even knew that you could write books or stories or anything, you were writing songs. You wrote a lot of songs. I was so impressed the first time you pressed one of your songs on vinyl, and that's still something that I want to do. I was like so psyched when I saw that. I was like, wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. What is sort of the common thread, if any, between the sort of, I guess, the way you tell a story with a song, lyrics, music, and the way you tell a story with like writing a book or a novel?
Well, I'd say for me, my favorite songs that are like quote unquote story songs, like all the great story songs over time, and the ones that you remember, they kind of they usually deal with characters that are interesting to you. And just like a book, like a good story song, at least one with lyrics, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're all like all the parts are satisfying. I don't know if I was necessarily good at story songs, but I know, like, I can speak directly to story songs that I love and still love, and I'm just so impressed by, like, to a point where just looking at like the lyrics for a song that I love that's a story song, and just being amazed that one person, or seemingly so, one person was able to kind of encapsulate this little world into 3.5 or 4.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. To me, that's such a craft, and that's like such an art, and it's such a talented thing to be able to do. And
it's all about sort of trying to create the world that you want to see, right? I mean, the world is what it is, but in our mind we have these visions and these dreams and these things, and it's all about trying to bring those dreams out into the world and somehow make them at least just a little bit real.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's hugely part of it, is that especially when you're putting a piece of art into the world, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, it's exactly what you just said. Like, it's coming from you, and you want it to be an expression of yourself. Obviously, everything that you've done, and especially at the beginning, might have been modeled after something that had come before. But ultimately, I think you realize the things that you do well, and it's exciting when you're able to kind of articulate an emotion that you have that feels very unique to yourself, or an experience that you've had, or something that gets you excited, and you're able to articulate that through a piece of music, or through a story, or even through a drawing, and have somebody else be able to appreciate it. That's like the payoff ultimately. Because I can name 20 different things that from my first book that I know I was just like leaning on past stuff that I loved. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh, well, it's that sort of angle worked for this person. If I just twist a little bit, I can kind of change it and make it a little bit unique. And I think what's happened is, over time, I realize what makes my stories special and what I enjoy about them. And I realize that, especially with something like a book where I'm going to have to live with it for the bulk of the year, I damn well better love it. And I damn well better be entertained by it, because I'm going to have to read the thing at least 12 times from beginning to end. Mm. And I better know what is important to keep and what is not, what is getting in the way of the story, and what is just, tickling my own ego or making, you know what I mean?
Mm.
To try to get it. But I when you get those moments that feel just very unique to yourself, that like that you feel good about, that you realize that, like, yeah, this is my world, and this is putting that person in that place. And the reason why I love the pieces of art that I do, whether it's a great writer or a great musician, is for those specific moments that are unique to that person, whether it's how they play a solo, or whether it's a brushstroke, or on a painting, or whether it's the way somebody writes a sentence that's like can't be duplicated. You know what I mean? It's wholly original, and if somebody else tried to do it, you would see that, no, you're trying to do something that somebody else has done. Like, to get those moments, make those moments come out of yourself. And also discovery, because while you're doing the thing, especially writing and editing, you discover, you know what I mean? And I'm sure as a musician, you do too.
Sure.
If you hit a wrong note, and then it ends up turning into something completely different. But similarly with a story, it's like, well, what if I made this conversation go this way, or had this person interrupt, or whatever? You come up with something else. It works similarly. You can't be. It's a hard balancing act, but it's thrilling, and the greatest moments. And I think this speaks to exactly what you said. It's being able to create your world and share it, and have somebody else appreciate it.
How many books have you written now?
I've published 8, and I have written the manuscript for the 9th.
Which one is your favorite?
I'd probably say Kissing Oblivion. I feel the best about that. I feel like that was as close to what I had in mind initially. What comes out is not always what you have in mind, right?
No.
It's as close to it as it can be, right?
Right.
And I think, like, as far as my books are concerned, I think there's been some that have been closer than others, and I think Kissing Oblivion was as close to what I'd imagined I wanted from the jump. The one that you did the cover art for, Now We Have Nothing, was fairly close too. That was probably, I don't think I'd ever worked harder on a book as far as research is concerned, as far as,
yeah,
because I think it had the time jump and whatnot, and I wanted to make that as realistic as possible. That wasn't easy.
The book that you're working on now, do you find that you're drawing in any way upon, like, some of the past experiences, like the work that you've done on your previous novels, or is each one sort of its own separate entity? In
all fairness and in all honesty, there's been elements of my favorite auteurs that I've used to kind of propel me. Okay. Like, I think with Paper Bag Revolver, and I think I told you this, I'd read like 5 Jim Thompson novels, who was like this pulp writer. They called him the dime store Dostoevsky, because you can crank out these books, and they were a lot of fun, and they usually involved bad guys, a lot of sex, a lot of violence, and these compelling page turners, but you got a real idea of who these people were. And I'd read 5 of those, and I thought, like, boy, it would be fun to write a book like that, about sort of like, kind of like, not so great people, With my current book, it was definitely, I love, like, the idea of like a road trip. And I thought to myself, like, what if I combined something like that, like a road trip kind of story, with a detective story? Now, I am not a fan at all of, like, police procedurals. My dad, like, loves that stuff, like Michael Connelly and the Harry Bosch novels and, like, all these things. Like, I am not that guy. That is not what I like to read. But like, I love the Big Lebowski. And as crazy as the Big Lebowski is, and it's a comedy, it's still a detective story. And he's not necessarily a conventional detective. He's just a hippie who happens to find himself in the circumstance.
Right.
But I thought, like, I can rely on that. And there's other stories too, where like a Manhattan Murder Mystery or something like that, or something like where it's like just regular people find themselves trying to solve a mystery, and almost have to become a detective themselves, even though it's not necessarily their profession. So I thought, what if I could combine those two things I love into my own story? And that's essentially what I did through the month of November, to create this story. It needs a lot of work, but I've got a beginning, I've got a middle, and I know how it ends, and I can iron out the rest for the majority of 2021.
Yep.
But I think that's what I've done, where I've kind of like taken like a passion for one particular genre or one particular auteur's style of making things, or maybe multiple auteurs' style of doing something, and then I've kind of taken those influences in and tried to push them out as something wholly original. In that, combining two different things, it's so easy. Like, you think about like the things you love, man, like all the things you love can usually be described as like, it's a combination of this and this, or just like the easiest way to like tell somebody about something is like, it's a cross between this and this. And if they're two great things, like, people aren't going to like debate you. They're going to be like, I kind of like to see that. You know, if you said like, well, it's a combination of Jaws and Pulp Fiction. Like, people are going to be like, Jaws and Pulp Fiction. Whoa, this is going to be awesome. Like, I have no idea what the hell that would be. But like, if you describe something like that to somebody, it's an easy sell, right?
You got to see it.
Yeah. It's like Jurassic Park meets Star Wars.
Back to the podcast before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask a few questions. First of all, if you had any like particular episodes or interviews that stood out to you as being some of your favorites. I'm also very curious about the name, the origin of the name, where it comes from.
I interviewed Lily Konigsberg. That was this indie musician. She's been in a couple bands, and she put out like a 4-song single or something that got a really good review on Pitchfork. And I did as much research as I could. It felt like we were of similar energies, I guess is the best way to put it, where we were kind of like on the same wavelength. We were both equally excited, and I felt like that went over quite well. As far as the name of the podcast, I know you had a question about that. Okay, this is how that happened. And I don't know if I told you this before, but I was in a Goodwill store and I was looking through the vinyl there, and I saw this white album with this smiling woman from like the 70s on the front of it. And there were two faces next to her. There was like 3 people on there, and they were all like these smiling black and white faces, and like the coiffed hair and everything like that. And I was like, and I looked at the title of the album, and I thought it said "People Are the Enemy," and I was like, what the hell is this? And then I looked at it again, and it said "People Are the Energy," and I said, oh, "People Are the Energy." Oh, that makes more sense. I flipped it over, and it was like a Up With People album.
I see.
Remember, like Up With People? So it's on Spotify, by the way, that album. And I thought to myself, like, boy, "People Are the Enemy" is a great title for something. So I put it on social media, and I said, I just found this record called "People Are the Energy." And the first time I read it, I thought it said "People Are the Enemy." And immediately people were like, my followers were like, that's a fantastic title. You ought to use that for something. And I'm like, it's yours. Take it. You can use it. Use it as a band name. Use it as a name for a song. Use it as a name for a book, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, do something with it. And after a year, nobody had done anything with it. So I was like, fuck it. No one's going to use this, and I'm going to use it. And I'll just call my podcast "People Are the Enemy" because it's a great name.
Yeah.
The problem is that, like, I think it scares people away. Like, I interviewed like this woman, Louise, from this band Banny Grove. And I think she was nervous. And then, like, she asked during the podcast, like, why is your show called "People Are the Enemy"?
It sounds like you're about to start a revolution of some kind.
Yeah, it doesn't sound, it's not friendly. The one thing that's helped out is that, like, and I'm sure you're on this more than once on Instagram, where I've got the portfolio of all the photos. And I think, like, anytime I've approached somebody, and I did this as recently as like last week, I sent a request to interview this singer that I'm really interested in, this musician that I'm really interested in. And I said, the show's called "People Are the Enemy." And I said, I've got a portfolio of photographs on Instagram. You can see all the other people that I've spoken with. And I think that kind of makes people feel a little bit easier. I think the biggest thing, though, like, if I can stress anything at all, and it's one thing that I've learned after doing this, is like you have to, like, for me, I have to talk to somebody I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine somebody that, like, you think about like Jimmy Fallon interviews like a different person 5 nights a week, and Jimmy Kimmel and Conan O'Brien, like these guys, there's people that, and I know that because they've talked about this in interviews just that have nothing to do with their show, that there's people that they're lying through their teeth about, that they're interested in what they're doing, or that they loved their movie or they loved their album. Or it's like, I remember like sometimes with Jimmy Fallon, I'm like, there's no way he likes this piece of shit movie, and he's talking about like it's the greatest thing ever.
Right.
And like with Conan, I think he's so intelligent, and he's been at it since for over 25 years, that he knows a way to talk around it where he's not lying through his teeth, right in front of God and the world. Instead, he's kind of making it sound like he's asking questions, but he's not like fawning over something that he doesn't give a shit about. The people that I'm interested in, a lot of, as far as musicians are concerned, I'm interested in indie rock and indie pop, and the folks who do that are very accessible. They're not necessarily it's not like the most popular forms of music right now, so it's not like I'm a hip hop fan and I'm trying to get Kendrick Lamar, but I can get really passionate about an independent artist who's put out a few albums or even just 1 or 2 albums, and that I can really get into the albums and appreciate the work that they've done and find angles to talk about based on what I know about what they're doing and their genre of music. I think when you hear somebody speak to somebody that they're genuinely interested in, as far as what they do creatively, then it's going to come through on the other end for the listener or the viewer.
I think if you take the approach of, as an interviewer or a presenter, you are sort of a conduit of sorts that allows, whoever this creative person, whatever it is that they're creating, to, share their whatever content with the world, and you're just sort of helping to boost or lift that up. I feel like almost more so than personalities that I want to connect with, I want to talk about like specific things or concepts or ideas that I think are important. Like, to talk with you, and obviously, we talk often anyway, but I think it's important to me to talk about artistry and creativity and things of this nature. How often, if at all, do you get feedback from listeners about what you're posting on your podcast?
Maybe once or twice a month.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, I get between 600 and 900 listens a month.
Yeah.
That's
great.
It's not bad. It's like 20 a day.
Yeah.
Basically 20 downloads a day. That's pretty good for like a 25-minute show once a week.
Well, I think this was a great interview. Are there any?
I think so too. Good job, Ben.
Thank you, sir. Are there any final thoughts?
As long as you stay true to yourself and you keep the content of whatever it is, whether it's a podcast and a vlog or in a video cast, or whether it's a combination of the two or just a video cast, whatever it is, as long as it's interesting to you at that moment, at that time, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
Well, I really want to thank my guest, Andy Mascola, for taking the time to talk to me. And I want to thank you for taking the time to give us a listen. Once again, Andy's latest book is called Where Are You Now, Randy Dow, and that is available on Amazon.com, as well as all of his other titles. His podcast can be heard every Monday, and that's called The People Are the Enemy. If you're watching me on YouTube, I want to encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time we upload a new episode of the show. Please join me next time when my guest will be musician and artist Patino Vasquez, and we're going to talk about veganism and the environment. Until next time, peace.